Welcome to this program. My name is Simon. This is a short history of the Jewish people. We are at the 12th century. We will focus this time on religious history. For many, this is very important and mostly interesting. We're going to talk about several influential individuals so that we can stay focused. The 12th century started where the First Crusade ended. It was called by some, today it's called by some, the 12th century Renaissance. Many changes took place and much advances in science, philosophy, and technology were introduced. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was Catholic. In fact, about half of Europe was Catholic. The Balkans and southern Italy were Orthodox. Europe was under the feudal system. Quite a large area was run by Norman barons and kings. A lot of it was run by Germany, which were the Franks. England had become a Norman kingdom. Spain was half Christian and half Muslim. North Africa was Muslim. The Byzantine Empire was still holding on in Constantinople and the Balkans. When talking about Jewish religious change, I will be discussing two separate historical game changers, which will be intertwined. First, we're going to talk about a rabbinical group called Baalei HaTosafot, which is basically quite a few rabbis over 200 years in the area of France and Germany who made additions to the Jewish law. I say additions because you can't subtract, you can only add. The second is a gentleman by the name of Maimonides, also known as the Rambam. So I'd like to introduce the Ashkenazi Jewish religious authority in Mainz, that is the Rhineland. The Jews actually called it Magnitza, or something like that. The Rhineland was the center of Baalei HaTosafot, the additionalists, such as Rabbeinu Tam. The changes that they made to Jewish law had been in conformity with local laws and customs. I will provide an interesting example. In accordance to Frankish laws, it had become illegal to marry more than a single wife at any given time. So monogamy was introduced into Jewish standards as well. The problem was that Jewish law also had a big section about the practice of levirate marriage. Levirate meant that if a married man dies without leaving a son, his brother is expected to marry his widow and produce the heir for him. This is all very old Jewish law. It was established back in the time of Moses. There was a problem with this custom. It was all good for the biblical times, but it was grossly outdated for later periods. Talmudic scholars already included a very exciting ceremony designed to get around leviating one's sister-in-law. This ceremonial process was called chalitza, and chalitza provided a second chance for the poor young widow to remarry, as well as more freedom for the unfortunate, still grieving, brother-in-law. The ceremony was also humiliating. It had the grieving widow take her brother-in-law's shoe off and throw it away, and then spitting on the floor, and various other delicacies. As silly as this might sound, it enabled the community to check out the young widow and increased her chance to remarry. For European rabbis, this ceremony did not present a problem. Far from it. It seemed fine that a young girl of 11 would have to go through this ceremony in front of the entire community before she's even had her first period. The problem was elsewhere. Jewish boys and girls married very young. Early death from disease was around the corner for many of them, even before the marriage was consummated. So this became an issue because of the dowry. If the child died young and the marriage did not last long enough, should the groom's family keep the dowry? How would the young widow ever remarry if her dowry was gone? Such were the issues then, and the Baalei Tosafot had to deal with it. And so they did. So this is an example of an Ashkenazi addition to the Jewish law. Now we are moving to a different subject in a different place. In the Iberian Christian state of Castilla, a large Jewish community prospered. Toledo at the time had a grand translating industry. All books became available in several languages, and quite a few Jewish scholars at the time were working on these translations, as well as Muslims and Christians. Toledo became a center for Jewish thought and mysticism. On the other side of the political border, in the Muslim-occupied Spain, there were other problems. The Iberian Jews lived under changing political regimes. Christian Spain, known mostly as Aragon and Castile, had one set of rules. Berber Spain had a different set of rules. Arab Iberia existed with its own standards, and to make matters worse, a war broke out between the different Muslim nations. All these circumstances led to a very interesting life for the Jews, and as we are about to hear, not in a positive way. I'm going to start with a very significant figure of the Rambam, a doctor, a rabbi, a philosopher. He's also known in English as Maimonides. As a young adult, the Rambam lived in Cordoba under Berber Muslim Spain. He was not considered a particularly good student for religious Jewish studies, and yet he was bright. He had become self-educated by reading every book available and memorizing it. In the mid-12th century, Cordoba was taken over by an even more fanatic Muslim dynasty, the Almohads. Everything fell apart for the Jewish community. Anyone not Muslim had to convert, migrate, or peacefully die. Maimonides was still a young man. Dying would have constituted a very poor choice for him. He moved to Fez in a hurry. That was Morocco, and he studied medicine at the university there. It is commonly accepted that he lived as a Muslim convert for a few years. Maimonides was later able to move to Fustat, which was the old city of Cairo in Egypt. He was welcomed by the Jewish community, first as a doctor, and also as a very influential rabbi. He was very adept in European and Muslim philosophy. He had read and studied everything that was available on religious philosophy. Fustat was also the home of the biggest Karaite Jewish community. They were Jews that only went by biblical rules. They had their own rules and kept away from rabbinical Judaism. I am thinking that part of the motivation of Maimonides in his future endeavor was to fence off Judaism from Karaite influence. So while living in the Jewish quarter of Fustat, Rambam worked as a medical doctor in Cairo. So every morning he would ride his donkey for about an hour to get to Cairo, and at night he wrote commentary on Jewish laws. Now, Jewish religious law at the time was a complete mishmash. It was a collection of dozens of compilations from ancient times. Each verdict contradicted another and included several opinions and what-if clauses. Many regulations were outdated. There were over 600 years' worth of correspondence from all over the Jewish diaspora. And not to forget, there were quite a few additions from the Baalei Tosafot, which we talked about earlier, from the Ashkenazi community. So one had to study for many years to know one's way around right and wrong. It was not for anyone. Maimonides found himself summarizing Jewish law into complete sets of instructions for each topic, leaving out minority opinions and past stories, and stating practical bottom-line rules. This simplified the law into a set of comprehensive booklets, 14 of them. Still not simple, but compared to the alternative, it was a significant shortcut. His compilation was called Mishneh Torah. Naturally, it was accepted by some communities with a great deal of skepticism, especially in Jewish centers like Iraq and Paris. Years later, the Rambam produced a complete guide for Jewish thought, like an encyclopedia and an instructional guide to the Jewish religion. It was called The Guide for the Perplexed. This book, well actually a set of 3 books, gave a clear instructive opinion on all Jewish issues, all aspects to do with religion, prayer, study, family, dilemmas, the Sabbath, the afterlife, this life, the Messiah, heaven and hell, the occult. The guide provided a clear path for practitioners as not only what they should do, but what they might think and believe. One can see why some of this work was looked upon as the utmost audacity by the rabbinical establishment, especially when the books included lines such as, "This will be the only book you will ever have to study." Towards the end of his life, the Rambam published the 13 Principles of Jewish Faith. This was like a creed. Not that he added any new information, but by writing the already known ideas, he pontificated as to who is a true believer and who is not. This by far was the most aggravating of his works. There was a great deal of difficulty in accepting the Rambam's work at first. He told people what to do, how to do it, what to think, and what to believe in. This was a little too much for some. He also broke away from several traditions. He did not consult with any of the leading authority, with none of the Jewish centers throughout the world. His effort was entirely individual. It took over 100 years for the controversy to slowly die out. Jews were boycotting one another, books were destroyed and forbidden, people stopped speaking to one another in shul. Hundreds of venomous letters were sent. There was so much animosity among scholars over his teaching. And yet, be that as it may, the Rambam today is considered by far the most important authority of his time. He revolutionized practice, study, and belief. His work had an incredible influence on future scholars. It is studied till today. So, the 12th century witnessed a significant change in Jewish religion. We speak about Ashkenazi additions, about Maimonides, and we will have an additional chapter about the Jewish history of the 12th century because a great deal was happening. For now, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe.